the minimum wage fight that was fought in Seattle and other cities 10 years ago is now starting to catch up to small businesses who were given 10-year period of time to try to put themselves in a position to be able to keep up with the wage that the Seattle City Council thought they ought to be paying their employees. And it is no surprise that even 10 years later, some of those small businesses are really going to be challenged to meet that high wage. This segment is brought to you by Eastside Weight Loss Clinic. Sick of fad diets that work for a couple months and then you gain all the weight back? Well, I'm down 37 pounds on the Eastside Weight Loss Clinic program, and I've kept that weight off for more than a year. Schedule your free 15-minute consultation today at eastsideweightlossclinic.com. I was a reporter in Seattle at the time. I remember covering this very, very well, where Seattle was one of the first big cities in the nation to decide to pursue the $15 an hour minimum wage at that point. And what it does is it raises every year based on inflation. But that $15 an hour jump was significant for a lot of businesses. And so there was this understanding at the time, and in order to even get enough people on board to make it pass, that you can't overnight treat large corporations the same that you treat small businesses. Smaller businesses that are operating with smaller margins, smaller profit margins, they're going to need more time to figure out how to do this. Well, time's up, apparently, in the city of Seattle, and now that phased-in period is going to be done for small businesses. You know, for several years, for instance, if it was a restaurant, they were allowed to, it could be a lower wage, but tips could compensate for it. So that was part of like making up the gap that wasn't available to larger corporations. So not a surprise that, like, look, and I'll just put it this way. If you were a restaurant 10 years ago and you were struggling to pay, your workers and keep everyone on board at that wage, there's no reason why fast forward 10 years, unless your business has grown significantly, why that challenge wouldn't still exist. And that's what you're seeing. I'll tell you though, there's a quote in this Seattle Times story that's going to absolutely drive you crazy. I'll get to it in a moment. So the headline from the Seattle Times: restaurant industry scrambles as new minimum wage approaches. It says, now the time is up, and next year businesses with fewer than 500 employees may no longer deduct any tips or benefits from their hourly wages. As a result, wages could go up by $3 or more per hour, by far the largest increase since the law took effect in 2015. The long-planned end to a tiered wage system could mean significant raises for thousands of low-wage workers. It's also sending panic through the restaurant industry and brings yet another hefty political question before a city council that's only just moved into the second floor of City Hall. Many of its members won their seats on the promise of friendlier relations with the city's business world. Now parts of that world are asking the council to slow the final rollout of what may be Seattle's defining political movement of the last decade. So it talks a little bit about how this law works and how it has developed over the past decade, just to give you some background. So in the years since the law took effect, the annual increase in wages has been dictated by inflation. This year, businesses with more than 500 employees must pay $19.97 an hour, while those smaller than that can pay $17.25 so long as their workers make up the difference with tips or benefits. The city's Office of Labor Standards will announce the increase for next year this fall, but what's clear is that for small businesses, the credit for tips and benefits will go away, meaning wages will likely go up by more than $3 an hour. That's double the previous high of $1.50 an hour in 2020 and 2021, and more than triple the average yearly increase. So for these small businesses that have been, they've had to increase wages over the last decade, but they've had the option to offset that with tips and benefits. So now that they don't have that option, this is going to be a huge jump for them year over year. So the Seattle Times spoke to a few restaurateurs about the impact, and they're worried, and I understand why. This is from Amy Fair Gunner, who's co-owner of Portage Bay Cafe, one of my favorite brunch spots in the Seattle area. Little commercial there. She says no restaurant has this margin, so they'll be asked to seriously change what they're doing or they're going to close their doors. The Seattle Times also spoke to restaurateur Ethan Stoll, famous restaurant owner in Seattle. His businesses offer a preview of what the switch will mean. He exceeded 500 employees for the first time last year, meaning he could no longer count tips. The financial hit, he said, was significant, and he followed it by switching everyone to an hourly rate and adding a service charge to his checks. The reaction reaction among his staff was mixed. For some, it was positive because it meant they earned more on sick days or when taking leave. Others decided to quit over the change. He doesn't have a strong position on what the council should do, but said the issue will force change. Quote, you either have to change the model next year or prices are going to go up astronomically or places are going to have to close down, Stoll said. As for the co-owner of the Portage Bay Cafe, she estimates a $3 increase will increase their expenses by $45,000 a month. $45,000 a month. They have several locations in Seattle. She said, for us, it's a make or break situation, at least as far as operating our restaurants the way that we do. And any sane person, any sane, kind, normal thinking person would understand that this is going to be a difficult situation for restaurants. And the last thing we want is for restaurants to have to close down and fire all their staff as a result. That's where you get into the trouble, right? With the wage and the government dictating, you know, these big increases and big jumps. I mean, $3 an hour per employee is quite a bit, because what's the alternative? Well, if they can't do it, they'll have to cut back hours or they'll have to lay people off. And is that really what the crafters of this wanted? I tend to think probably not, right? If you're like pro-union, pro-worker, you know, I would venture to guess that a worker would rather be employed at $17 an hour than unemployed because the city forced their employee to raise their wage to $19 an hour. But there's this quote in here from the former president of SEIU 775, David Rolfe, that I can't grasp this way of thinking. He said they can't claim ignorance. They can only claim that they weren't prepared. He says these guys got 10 years to get their acts together, and if they haven't figured out how to run a successful business without screwing workers, shame on them. They don't deserve to be in business. That is someone who's never run a business before in their life. That is someone who's never, you cannot make money out of thin air. You cannot make more money out of thin air. You can't, as the Portage Bay Cafe, without raising prices, right, significantly, which is an option, I suppose. But then that's going to reduce the number of people who are willing to go there for breakfast and brunch. So then it's going to even out in the long run. You cannot come up with $45,000 extra a month overnight, or frankly, even in the course of 10 years. So what you're suggesting and what you're saying is that small businesses that operate on the margins, that operate with relatively low profit margins, if they can't come up with a way to increase their monthly expenses to be able to pay an extra $45,000 a month, then they shouldn't be in business. They don't deserve to be in business. That is the way of thinking that got Seattle into this mess. And that way of thinking that, hey, artificially increasing wages, because my position on this is I do think that you should be able to pay your employees kind of a living wage, so to speak, in certain jobs. But there are other jobs that, I'm sorry, they weren't meant to be living wage jobs. I mean, I hate to put it any other way, but like I look at Starbucks where baristas will protest because they're getting like $20 an hour and it's not enough. Well, Starbucks pays for its employees to go to school to get degrees so they don't work at Starbucks for the rest of their lives, so they can go on and find a career that will pay them a wage where they can afford to live in Seattle. You have free will. If you're working for Portage Bay Cafe and you're not making enough money, or they don't treat you right, or whatever it is, there are a million different restaurants in Seattle that you can go work for that do pay you what you believe you're worth. And that's how the free market increases wages, is restaurants figure out, okay, what's the going rate to pay a server? What's the going rate to pay a bartender? And then the free market determines that, because if you're running a restaurant and you've got people quitting left and right for other jobs, well, you're probably not paying them enough. And if you want people to stay, you want good people to stay, you're going to have to pay them more. And that's how the free market works. But Seattle says, to hell with the free market, we're going to artificially inflate wages. And then if they all have to just fire people, well, they should have planned better. And you don't understand that actually in the long run hurts workers. This guy, you don't deserve to be in business? Nicole, let's reach out to this gentleman. I'm sure that he would make a wonderful guest on the Undivided podcast, and we can have a nice, robust debate about economics. Unbelievable, truly unbelievable.